right. I'm Charlie. My friend Alana Lane, it sounds like a celebrity, honestly. Lana Lane is here. Maybe like a rock star from the 70s or something. I don't know. And her and I work together at Learning Network, and we somehow have convinced Kim that it is super fun to hang out with us. And so Kim Tackaberry is here as well from the Calgary Regional Office. And we hope that this session begins as a trend, we might say, through cross-office collaboration across ARPDC. So know that if you reach out to any one of us, we are closely connected and networked with our colleagues. And if we can't answer or help you out, we reach out to one another to seek out ways that we can help and support you. So when you call one of us, you get all of us. That's I
It's a
would say
package.
value add, but I don't, maybe you'll have a different opinion by the time this is done. So here's our plan today. You do not get to listen to me talk the whole time. So count your lucky stars there. We're going to talk about organizing ideas and the pillars of reading because I think it's really important that we start with the stuff we're actually required to teach and do. We're going to talk a little bit about time guides. Notice it doesn't say rules because we can't do anything other than offer guides or suggestions. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of capacity building routines in your learning context. And then Lana's going to talk about the importance of talking and how that in itself is a skill that I think we took for granted as existing pre-COVID and are realizing that post-COVID, we've got some work to do. And then we're going to look at some sample schedules and invite you all to participate with us in exploring, discussing, and critiquing some of those samples that we've gathered and collected. And then we want to talk about how, of course, these samples change over time and what causes that to happen and what does that mean for our classroom and our classroom structures. And then because we would just love to teach literacy all the time, where else can you put it? Because it doesn't always fit in that chunk of time that you've allotted for it. And we're going to talk about the power of intentional planning, and then we're going to offer you some resources to extend your learning. And we're going to shove all of that into 75 very quick minutes. If at any time you have questions, throw them in the chat box, unmute yourself. We run a very, very relaxed program around here. So don't feel bad if you want to hop in and ask anything or offer an observation. You're welcome to do that at any time. Okay, as you know, the organizing ideas are consistent across a number of grades, and you can think of the organizing ideas like chapters in a book. So if the book is English language arts and literature, you are going to find these chapters within it. Now, you'll notice here that some of them extend K to 6, text forms and structures, oral language, vocabulary. Other organizing ideas do not. So we have phonological awareness ending at grade 2. We have phonics ending in theory in grade 3, and fluency somehow ending in grade 4, except we all know we're still going to talk about fluency in our instruction. The reason we're pointing this out is even if you are a grade 6 teacher who are secretly celebrating right now because you've got 3 fewer organizing ideas to manage than the teacher in grade 2, we all know we have students that are running like the gamut of skills. And so if you are finding that you have kiddos that need support in fluency, they need support in phonics, they're missing some foundational pieces around phonological awareness, go back in the grades, find where they're at and use that to inform and support some of that intervention planning that you need to do with those kiddos that are missing or just need a little top up in their understanding around those organizing ideas. Interestingly enough, we can take these organizing ideas and align them or cross them over with the pillars of reading. So if you are living in that pillars of reading understanding, it all fits. Like that's the beauty of it. Okay. And so we talked a lot about as we were supporting this work in the K to 3 implementation around grounding ourselves in quality instructional practices. And so when we have these quality instructional or high yield, whatever buzzword you want to add as an adjective to your teaching, you can see here there's crossover and connection between the areas captured by pillars of reading and the organizing ideas from the curriculum. So that is just to provide you with a little bit of like, okay, then I've got this. And so you're not feeling like you have to do that dot connection yourself. Lana and Kim, I'm assuming you're jumping in at any time if I go off script here. All right. So that brings us to how much time? How much time am I supposed to be doing this anyway? I don't have enough time for this, Charlie. Thank you very much. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that each of these little stopwatches are in fact a fraction of time. So phonological awareness is about 10 minutes a day. And phonics might be about 15 minutes a day. Vocabulary, 10 minutes a day. And you can see here, if you're doing some mental math, wait a second, you've exceeded my minutes of instruction for the day. I know I have. That's why it's a guide. And you can decide where you're spending your time and focus throughout the year or throughout that week. You might also find that your conversation around phonics is actually highlighting pieces of phonological awareness, i.e. grapheme phoneme correspondence. And so we've got like a 2 birds, 1 stone situation happening there. You might also find that your read aloud 10 minutes isn't actually going to be part of your 90 minutes that you're doing your LA time for. Now, I say in the morning because that was like the sweet spot for language arts instruction. So I default to saying your 90 minutes every morning, but once upon a time, I don't know who built my schedule. They were mean. Anyway, I had phys ed plopped in like the first hour of the morning in my grade 2 class. So the only time I had a 90-minute chunk without interruption was the afternoon. So once I like had some therapy and got over that, I realized that 90 minutes was just as valuable as the first 90 minutes. It was really my own headspace that I had to like get past that. So wherever you might find that you're sticking some of these things in other places or in other subjects. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the where else can it go conversation. Again, just a guide. I don't think in the planet ever have I offered a mini lesson that was actually only 15 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
I do short videos and they're like 8 minutes, my friends. And so there is no like quick conversation as demonstrated by the first 15 minutes of this session in my world. So if you know that you're a chatty Cathy, just like me, that might mean some tweaking around the amount of time allotment that you're offering in that mini lesson. And Kim and I have a sample schedule we have a sample schedule we're going to share. And we had talked about this before because they're offering like 12-minute small group instruction intervals.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, well, I would talk for 10 of those 12 minutes. And then the other 2 minutes are transitions. So like my kids aren't going to talk and they're not going to do anything in that guided reading or small group instruction time.
I was going to say something to think about too when you're looking at these time frames, and we've had lots of conversations in the north where I work about that consistent routine and the boundary and the structure that we're all craving right now. And I think more so after our COVID times, but that can there be some creativity in, is there some allowance for a very consistent same Monday through Friday schedule? Definitely in those younger years, like that K-2, where it's uninterrupted and it's the same Monday through Friday, right? So that the students get into that routine and the structure of what's happening. And it's important, I think, in that 4 to 6 as well, but it's a starting block, I think, for many schools where can we look at those younger years and really be consistent in the time frame of what goes on between here and here, and it's the same every day, so that all of those capacity building routines that we're talking about are learned quicker and reinforced easier when it's the same every day. So just a thought.
But I'll add one thing, and that is with the mini lesson. I think something to remember, and this, K to 3, but even 4 to 6, is a lesson can be broken up into manageable parts. So you can do a bit of a lesson and then give a natural break where they turn and talk. And I know Lana is going to talk about the importance of oracy and student talk time. So the little chunks can have breaks in them where
Yes.
you can adjust them that way. I just wanted to add that.
Now, it's interesting because the minutes of instruction actually change. I think it's grade 3 to 6. It shifts from 30% of the time to only 25% of the time. Now, with that said, I don't think I've ever seen a schedule that doesn't give at least 30% of their time for literacy or language arts. We see very similar ideas that you would have chunks of time designed or designated to certain activities. And again, it's just a guide. But notice I'm not spending 90 minutes on a vocabulary lesson. Capacity building routines, as Lana has mentioned, we can't understate the value of them. In part because we're starting to see, as we're supporting teachers in classrooms, that the intended high quality instruction lesson is being impeded by the student's inability to function without maximum levels of support and guidance. Being able to build up a routine where your students know, as soon as we come in from the recess bell, this is the routine. Or as soon as we come in the morning, this is the routine. Or when I'm done with this book or whatever, it goes over here in this bin, or goes in my desk. Or when I need a new pencil, this is how I solve this problem. And so taking time to work through that with students, build independence, celebrate when they pull that off, I think is a really good use of our time. Essentially, what we're getting at here is, how do you build independence amongst your students so that you could manage at times that small group instruction? And I don't know if I'm allowed to say daily 5 anymore, or if someone's going to hunt me down. But anyways, you know that thing called daily 5? Shh. All that was capacity building routines. How we teach our kiddos to be independent without us so that we can do what the most important work is in the classroom, which is that small group intervention type instruction. Those tasks that you're having your students do during a station rotation that you might call daily 5 are practice tasks. And you know that you've taught them how to do them before, they can do them independently. And because you already have a routine of what they do when they need help, they're not going to come interrupt you at your table space while you're working with the group of kiddos that is the focus of your time. So these are some examples of where you might build routines in your classroom. And we know that you have many, many other examples. So we're going to invite you at this point in slides 10 and 11 to go ahead and jump into the slide deck. If you're not there already, Kim just threw the link back up there. But in slides 10 and 11, pick a box and just add a routine that you use in your classroom.
So I want to highlight it. We know as teachers, those students that come to us with strong oral backgrounds, they've had lots of conversation, they've been involved in conversation at home, there's been lots of talk, there's been lots of reading. Those are usually your better readers and writers. So that reading, writing, and speaking and listening role that happens in our classroom is all interrelated. And when we talk listening and speaking, those stronger vocab kids, the ones that have had all of those experiences, definitely have more success in the reading and writing. So if you can just take note that reading and writing are dependent on the oral language skills, but eventually what we see in that scope and sequence, the reading and writing then extend the oral language that we want to see further on. So on the next slide, Charlie, you're going to see, and I hit this every time I go out into classrooms, we talk about this with workshops and with teachers. Think about a baby and how we start to learn. There's a lot of listening. We listen to all those sounds and learning that is going on around us, and eventually we start to speak. And then all of those sounds and things that we're speaking, eventually we start to see those words, letters, and sounds all showing up in the reading that we're doing. And the final stage in that is writing. So once kids have gone through this listening, speaking, and reading with all these words that we're talking about, and they're eventually able to write them, then we know we've succeeded. So unfortunately, the vocabulary of our students is on the decline, probably with some onset of technology and the lack of conversation and engagement in homes. But this is the scope and sequence. So when you think of the classroom activities that you're doing in your classroom, we're not going to have the reading and writing that we want to see if we don't have the strong oral language pieces. So the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what does that look like in your classroom? So when in your classroom do you have time allotted for your students to have conversation? So when in your day do students talk?
My students, they have, so during morning bin activity, during snack time, during free center playing. Those are the main ones on a daily
Okay.
basis.
So during center time, the turn and talk as sort of a circle share.
Kinda, yeah.
Mhm. And bin time. So when they're actually playing in bins or activities. So
Yeah.
center.
Yeah, centers, play centers, learning centers, that kind of thing.
Okay. Morning greetings would probably be another time, right? When you're greeting your students when they're coming into your classroom, whether that's at lunchtime, morning, after recess. Well, and often teachers will say lunchtime, snack time. Show and tell. Definitely some turn and talk right after a read aloud or some of the story elements that we've been talking about. And that can be in any classroom or content area, right? When we have students turn and talk to each other about the learnings and sort of the wonderings that they have based on what it is we're learning. Is it enough that we have students talking during lunchtime, engaged at recess time, where they're having to come up and have conversation? Is that enough? So I often talk about the deeper pieces of conversation and why it's important. So on this next slide, there you're going to see a picture of an egg carton, and it's actually not an egg carton. So in the chat, what I'd like you to do, we're going to do it all at the same time. So I want you to put your idea of what this egg carton could be, because it's not an egg carton, it's something else. I want you to put your idea in the chat, but we're all going to send at the same time. So I don't want you to press return or enter until you've got your idea and you've had some reflection. And if you have more than one idea, that's fine too. But how I've extended some of the learning in the conversation, we actually call them literacy starters. And I used it actually yesterday with grade 4 teachers in a learning session that we did, and we were all seated in a circle. And that's the other thing that we've noticed post-COVID is that we've moved away a little bit from the circle times, the sharing circles, the carpet time, and the closeness of where students are at. And I think when we talk these structures, boundaries, and routines, when students are sitting at their desk and they're watching learning on a screen, or they're involved in some learning on a screen, they're far away from you. And there's something to be said about the proximity of you, the teacher, and the learning activity that's going on. And often when you can gather students in close, where they're at your feet at a carpet time, or they're in a circle sitting in a chair where you are in close proximity, sometimes those management pieces and the behavioral kinds of things that we are now seeing that can be problematic in some classrooms, that changes in a hurry. So this activity that you're doing right now, where we're all going to push send here shortly, it was done in a classroom of grade 4 teachers, where we all brought our chairs in, we're sitting in a circle, and I started it by saying, this is not an egg carton. This is and whatever. And so if I said this was a typewriter, the next person said, well, this is not a typewriter, it's So if everybody's got their idea in the chat, we're going to push return now. Let's see the windfall of ideas. when I talk about the conversational pieces and going deeper, this looks a little bit different because it's guided. So I'm not sitting now listening to students talking during recess or lunch hour or the conversation that they're having at the carpet, but I'm guiding it a little bit more in, I can lead this now. So we might go around the circle a couple of times. And what's beautiful about this, and you even said it, Kim, a back massager. I never thought of that. But what this activity does is it spurs on more ideas for everybody else around the circle. So we think about idea sharing, creativity, all this kind of stuff, vocabulary building, and we extend the learning. So it's a little deeper than just a greeting at the door, right? And again, if we can build the vocabulary pieces, the creativity pieces, or even use this as a literacy starter, that it's conversation. And now we release the pen and kids are actually going to write about what this egg carton could be. Now we filled their head with a whole bunch of ideas. So that reading, writing connection that we talk about, we've listened in a circle, we've spoke our ideas, and now we extend it into the reading and the writing of things that we can now see. Beautiful idea, beautiful fun activity that can just be very, quick and easy, and something simple to do in your classroom. And here's one other final way that we'll talk a little bit about conversation. I actually, what I'd like you to do here is having a look at this photo, and we talk perspective. This is another idea with perspective, but I want you to create a little story in the chat about who's in this picture. What's happening? When could this have been happening? Where was it happening? Why was this happening? And if you were actually in this space when you saw this picture, or you were actually in this picture from the outside, what would you be feeling and smelling and tasting, hearing and seeing? So what is the story behind this picture? And again, when we're talking oral conversation, you're writing it today in the chat, but in our classrooms, this wouldn't have been a written task. This would have been a sharing task where I'm going to give you some think time about what your thoughts are on this photo. And then maybe we're going to release you to your partner share, where you're actually going to turn now and talk to your partner about what was your story behind this picture. And then maybe we release those stories to the whole class in conversation. And if I did want to eventually make this into a written task, we've already got all the ideas and we've shared and we've talked and we've discussed, we've built the vocabulary around it. We've seen different perspectives. That writing task that is often challenging to some students, we've prepared them for success to actually now go do a written task. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes in the chat. I want you to create your story of this picture, answering these questions: the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, but then also looking at your 5 senses. If you were actually experiencing this, what would this story be for you? So as you're finishing up your story and sharing, I was the mom that was in the stands watching my daughter. And this is a photo finish of a race last summer at Summer Games, Alberta versus Saskatchewan. And we were all sitting there in suspense as we were waiting for the announcer to let us know which boat was actually first in this race. And as it turned out, with all the cheering and the clapping of people and just the swishing of the water that you could hear and the grunting of the girls in the boats, the smell of hot dogs and popcorn and everything else that would go on with the sporting event in the stands, my daughter happened to be in boat 6, which ended up in 3rd place, beating out Alberta in this final race at Summer Games. So that is the story behind the photo. If you want kids to be better readers and writers, you need to solidify that basic kind of foundational piece of oral conversation in your classrooms. And here are just 5 of some of those reasons that would be critical for the teaching and learning that comes with that oral conversation. That talk will reveal the understanding and the misunderstanding that our students have in whatever topic of discussion we are in right now. It shares the knowledge and I guess lessens the reliance on us, the teacher, that we are the only source of knowledge in the room. There's lots of conversation and talk around those students that are your high talk kids and the ones that have the strong vocabularies, that we're doing a lot of group work and partner work with students that are ESL students or that have lower oral language, and how important that is that we intermix these kids. We know talk stimulates whole language development. And if we're talking about the steps of our learning, that's important. And I think, again, in a day and age where technology is so in the face, and we actually see more foreheads than we see eyes of students, it's important that we engage them in those conversational pieces. We are social beings. So the social skills that happen when we're engaged in conversation and talk is very, very important. And for sure, deepens the reasoning and the understanding of all those things that we're talking about. So when we look ahead to all of these samples of things that we're going to see with our timetabling, where do you put conversational pieces in that planning of your timetables and scheduling so that kids are engaged in conversation? It's very, very important.
Thanks, Lana. I'm realizing we should have booked a whole afternoon.
Yeah.
Is basically where I'm at here. So we're emphasizing here, of course, that these are sample schedules that we're going to look at, and these are not models. They are not perfect, and some of them may not even be totally complete from a supervision evaluation sort of standpoint. But the reason we're sharing samples, not models, is because we need to remember, as outlined by the TQS, that we are the ones that make the decisions about how to teach the what. So the organizing ideas gives us the what, and it's our responsibility to figure out the how part of things. Every single one of us has had times when this class is not like last year's class, and this day of the week is not like last week, and we need to make those adjustments, and nothing is quote unquote set on stone, and nothing is quote unquote the way to do this. And so there's lots of flexibility and difference in these samples that we've put together for you. So we're encouraging you to, if you happen to have it with you, looking at your own language arts schedules and how you kind of block that out or sort that out in your day, and compare them with some of these samples. If you're like at maximum brain capacity and you can't handle like super deeper thinking at this point, just stick with these two questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder? They're like the best two questions that you can carry around in your pocket to promote some sort of thinking and evaluation as you go through different samples or contexts. Is there anything missing in the sample schedule? What about in your own schedule? We just talked about the importance of oral language. I personally did not intentionally plan oral language as part of my schedule, like ever. Now that I know what I know, holy snap, I would do that. And I would make sure that I am purposely addressing certain aspects of oral language and oracy in my weekly planning. What organizing ideas are prioritized in the sample? Do you find that some of the organizing ideas are more prevalent or more pronounced than others? Are all of them there, or are some of them missing? And that's not to say that you have to have 15 minutes for fluency. That's not what we're saying. But you might notice, as we did, that a number of the schedules leaned really heavily into reading skill development and didn't leave a lot of time for writing skill development. In fact, we came across some that didn't have any writing in them. And so are we mindfully plotting out our time, allotting our time to the organizing ideas as we deem prioritized or important? Would this schedule be the same for the whole year, or how's it going to shift and change? And maybe where else would you include literacy instruction in your day? Now, if those feel a little too like heavy lifting, you'll notice that after every single schedule, there is a green and gray chart. So you can scan through from slides 21 to 39, I believe. You're going to see a whole bunch of different schedule samples. So I might look at this one here, and I see a day 1, day 2, kindergarten, grade 1 kind of rotation sample. And I might have some questions about it. So I'm going to write my wonderings here. Or I might say, you know what? I love the idea of a day 1, day 2, because do you know how many times I lose a day in the week? And then like my whole schedule is messed up for life. And some of those kiddos who were like, it is Thursday and we're supposed to do morphology first, get angry because we missed Wednesday and all the things. So maybe we don't label it as a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But maybe we label it as a day one, day two, or reading focus day, writing focus day, like whatever. So after every sample schedule, you will see a reflection tool. You are not required to use this tool. It's just a place where you can make some notes. The number of minutes that are allotted in that schedule exceed even the 90-minute allocation, which we know exceeds the actual allocation of 25%. So you're going to have times where you look at the sample and go, wait a second, this doesn't add up. And that's when that teacher is either going to have to use maybe the 20 minutes of vocabulary work. Maybe that lives in another subject area. So I'm actually claiming that as science time or social studies time or math time, but it's also literacy time, right? Because we have the power to do that.
For sure. And I think something that's important to note too is not every schedule is going to be our personal preferences either. We're all going to gravitate to something that works for us visually in terms of planning. So this one I loved, Lana. She was like, I think it's slide 36. She said, she goes, I don't like this, right? And I think that's fair. Like we're all going to have different, oh, actually it was 36, I think was the next one. Because it does like a rotation by groups and numbers. So you'll see where it gives the different groups. I think it's the next one. Yeah, it gives the different groups and what they'll be focusing on. And then the little schedule embedded in there is 15 to 20 minutes, Monday to Friday, where the groups shift from the learning experience to the next one, and they have 3 rotation sessions. And actually it's interesting because when I saw this one, I thought of when I worked at Foothills Academy, which is a school for children with learning disabilities. 3 teachers got together and we each offered different learning experiences, and the students would rotate in groups. And so I thought something like this might work too if you're working with a partner teacher. Anyhow, just to give an overview of some of them are quite complex and may not be your forte, but please take a look and see what you think.
This has been my thing for a long time. Block look like, and too often I go and I see teachers and they have LA from 9 a.m. till 10:30 or 11, and I'm like, what are you doing there? Where is your intention? Because I know I used to do morning message and I'd look up at the clock and it'd be 9:45 and I'd be like, oh my God. I just gassed the whole day. So I've been doing this structural thing since probably about 2007, where I looked at, back then it wasn't structured literacy, it was the National Reading Panel suggestions. And am I doing my phonics? Am I doing phono? Am I doing comprehension instruction? So a lot of these look very much like it and is a typical spin, you know. And I had 2 days a week where we did Beck and McCowan's vocab development, and we had a reading comprehension, or we would have a decoding lesson. I used to use, so this is how old I am, but we had the old machinery, those old opaque projectors that were like really hot. And that's how I did my guided reading for the whole group and decoding. And I did that until it caught on fire, and it said, no, you can't do that anymore. So, but you know, so a lot of these look very similar. And I think it's just showing people intention in what you're doing. So I did that presentation, 1 book, 1 week, and that's exactly the layout of these is exactly what it was, but I brought it to 1 book. So when you're reading that book, how is it scaffolding everything you're doing? So, you know, and that was, for me, it was easier to wrap my head around if I had an anchor text for reading and for writing, and fill out some of the words that we would see and then tie it to a decodable, whatever, depending on the grades. So very much on the same page. It's good to see that I'm not way in left field. So,
well, that is good news. Welcome to the club. Thank you, Petronella. Welcome to the club of us way out in left field, but that's okay. We have friends. There's a community out there in the left field, so we're totally good. I did notice slide 29. There was a question around what is a writer's notebook. So you can call it anything you want, but writers, like published authors or recreational writers, often talk about a place where they record their ideas. And anytime I think that we can mm, replicate or support this belief that you are writers, you are artists, you are scientists, you are mathematicians, and here are the tools that folks use in these fields. And so, whether it's just like a simple notebook, or now that we all like support the Amazon, I know I personally do, and you can get those ones that have like the black and white speckled covers and it looks like an old school notebook. And so basically it's just a place where students are starting the writing projects and thinking about their writing. So I would often do things like picture prompts or responding to a piece of music. Now that I know what I know, we would do some building with loose parts and then have them labeling and doing some work a la Angela Stockman. Starting, a cliffhanger sentence and them having to finish it in their notebooks, doing brainstorming around favorite colors and where we find them, and basically it's just a place to collect all their writing. And so then when we get into writers workshop, or we're doing something like station rotation, and one of the stations might be working on writing, they can pull out their writer's notebook and choose to work on a self-selected writing project. When I teach writers workshop, it might be our whole class is working on this form of writing or this purpose of writing, but then I also want to make sure I'm including time for our students to do some self-selected choice writing, and them figuring out what they like as a writer and what their voice looks like. So that's what a writer's notebook
Charlie,
is.
if you look at slide deck 31 too, or the slide, slide, even that, like the written response to a prompt is exactly that too. So it would
Yes.
be in a writer's notebook or something similar, where teacher could even just put up like some sort of a visual that now the students have to respond into, and that could be in their writer's notebook, right? So it's a very time, like quick, just what is it you're wondering about and thinking about based on the text or that visual that we've just shared. So that's the same idea, a written response, right?
So I know that, again, time is our enemy. And so you are going to want to take more time, I think, to look at these samples. Again, remembering they are samples, not models, and using them as a compare and contrast to what does your time look like. So Petronella talked about if all that you have on your schedule is 90 minutes of LA, maybe you want to bring a little more clarity to how that 90 minutes breaks down on any given day or in a week. And so by doing that, you can ensure that you are addressing or working towards those key pieces around the organizing ideas, because I found a number of these samples did not have a lot of time for writing instruction. And so maybe that's being built into other subject areas, and that's totally possible, but we can't necessarily assume that. And obviously we're the planners, so we know if it's in some other place, but at the same time we have to account for it. And it's easily forgotten, I think, because we feel like, well, they need to read before they can write, and so we're going to spend a lot of time on reading because we're measuring that, and no one's measuring the writing for the most part. And so then we get pulled, right? We feel like we have to go in this direction, and we're forgetting about a really key piece of skills. So I very quickly want to highlight for you a couple of other pieces in our presentation. So both of these are linked, and the intent of this is to simply highlight for you the intentionality of planning. So there was lots of times I would accidentally have time for my students to talk to one another, but I want to make sure I'm planning for time for my students to talk to one another. And this idea that Petronella shared about taking a book and using it all week, well, I can look at my read aloud here, and I'm going to put one book down maybe on Monday, and we're just going to enjoy it on Monday because we should always enjoy the read aloud first. But then the next time I pick it up, maybe I'm going to use it to look at the ing suffix. What words have ing? And then on Wednesday, maybe I'm going to use it for something else. And on Thursday, maybe I'm going to use it for something else. And so this allows you to plan a week at a glance around all of those areas. And you'll notice that it lives with other subjects and stuff in mind. and you can intentionally plan it instead of accidentally letting it happen. A column for assessment, you can make a copy, do this, work with it as you will. Kim, can you speak to this responsive long range plan? Because it is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's also overwhelming for folks if
Overwhelming.
they've never
Yeah.
seen it before.
So yeah, and you can click on it, make a copy too, but I think for time's sake, I think I'm just gonna talk briefly. So this could be used for more than ELAL, but what I want to focus on is the reflect, respond, and recovery. So this comes from Katie White. She's an expert in assessment. But these yellow columns, I think, are worth noting. And that's that idea that as you're planning and working through your literacy blocks and you're working through weeks, take some time after, and this is, and you may be thinking, I do this, wonderful. But I think sometimes we get, kind of going with our literacy work, and I always needed reminders to stop. So maybe after a couple of weeks, taking some time to stop, reflect on what your students have been learning and where your students are at, and responding to those that need more work, for example, in phonics. How are you going to maybe reteach something that they haven't mastered yet? And then that recovery time. So building out time in your next week that you can do some of that small group work, if it's a one-on-one necessary or intervention you might want to use. But anyway, so I just wanted to highlight that. I love that that's embedded in that planner.
The other part of that is, of course, knowing that over time your schedule will change because you're going to spend time building those routines. And then, sometimes a Christmas miracle occurs and you can actually get through things faster than you could before Christmas. And sometimes you go for spring break and you're like, what happened to these children while they were on spring break? And you have to train them all over again. And so there are times where there's ebb and flow in your schedule, and that's totally okay. I know we try really hard to not unitize our work in language arts, but sometimes if you're in a middle school setup where you're the language arts teacher, you are forced to unitize some of your work just because of the nature of what we're doing. So please don't feel badly if you are in a space where you're unitizing some of your organizing ideas or key cusps. I think that's inevitable when we don't have that flexibility that we sometimes can get when we're a generalist teacher and we just sprinkle literacy everywhere. And then that's, we can make up the time, or we can do some of those cross-curricular pieces that we can't always pull off if we're just assigned to teach language arts exclusively. So where else can it go? Ongoing novel, easy win. Have a book on the go, fills your time. You're never a wasted moment while listening to a novel play out. You can have your students do activities like draw what they're imagining in their mind while you read. You could have them write down questions they're thinking of. You could have them tune into interesting vocabulary and keep an ongoing list of words that they find interesting. Or they could just enjoy the book. That's also allowed. Looking at where we can offer things cross-curricularly. So we're going to teach an oral language routine, but I'm actually going to assess it in math because we're going to talk about what we know, because not everything in math needs to be a pencil paper task. We're going to look at some writing that we're doing in science, and I'm going to actually assess it for conventions. Or, you know what, that research section that we all avoid like the plague, well, I'm just going to throw that into social studies, and that's where I'm going to do that one. You know what I mean? So look for cross-curricular entry points. The other thing you can do is think of those time filler activities. So like Heads Up 7 Up is a great example of a time filler activity. Not to say that that's not super fun to do once in a while, but we can also fill that time with something around literacy. So word ladders, which we've linked there in case you're not sure what a word ladder is. Guess the word, which we might have called hangman at one point, but we don't call it that anymore. But using sound boxes or grapheme circles for the students to guess what the word is. So if I'm looking at the word shapes, shapes, there's 4 sounds. So I'm going to have 4 circles, and where the E goes, I'm going to have a dotted circle because that indicates that there's a letter there that's not performing a sound. And so then I'm going to have my students guess either consonant clusters, vowel sounds, whatever, to go in the circles to guess the word. Doing something like a mystery word or wordscapes where you've got a word like backpack, but the letters are all mixed up on the board, and they have to brainstorm as many words as they can make with those letters, with the goal of as well as figuring out what the big word is. Or building a word family. So if I put the base on the word pack, P-A-C-K, in my little angle brackets, and then I'm going to ask them to build all of the words they can think of that are in the pack family. Packing, packs, packed, repack, unpack, backpack. See where I'm going with this? Those are all super quick things you can do that just keeps literacy learning going, that extends beyond your 90 minutes of time. Friends.
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay.
0 minutes.
Because we can't fit it all in a session, clearly we cannot. Slides numbers 42. Each one of those areas is hyperlinked to a slide deck that Lana put together around these organizing ideas. We know that the PDF, or when you go into the PowerPoints, the formatting is a little bunky. We know, but the content is still good. So ignore the formatting issues. But each of those will take you to our ARPDC resources site, and you can look at the PowerPoint there. Every one of those PowerPoints, there's like freaking links everywhere. So just spend some time, pour a coffee, Saturday morning, because we can't think of what else we do with our free time. Feel free to peruse those. And then the last slide, 44, is another amazing collection of resources that Kim put together of all kinds of pieces related to various language arts structures and routines. And so when you're thinking, oh man, I really need more about this idea, right? One of the questions was, what does vocabulary work look like? You'll be afraid that you asked, actually, because we have lots of examples of that. So thank you everyone who was able to join us. We appreciate all of you and the time you were able to share the ideas you offered. And please reach out with any questions if they happen to come up in the future once you're done digesting all of these things. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.